Comment on the video, where are people watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. The video begins with a lively prompt, inviting viewers to subscribe if they despise the antics of an overzealous HOA Karen. This initial call to action sets a playful, energetic tone while also foreshadowing that a combative neighborhood situation is at hand. The narrator, originally named Miles Corbin, now reintroduced here as David Cornwall, wastes no time establishing the quirky nature of the story to come. He teases that his Scarlet Storage Shed, a rather ordinary structure, is about to collide with the interests of an unabashedly bigoted individual named Patricia Whitfield, formerly Patricia Higginbotham. Though only a few seconds of content have passed, the introduction packs a punch by promising a tale that is both humorous and karmic. From the outset, David makes clear that this is no ordinary dispute. He references how a single incident involving his locked red shed somehow escalates into a community-wide debacle thanks to a meddling Karen. This comedic framing plays on viewers' expectations. Those familiar with HOA showdowns might anticipate the usual fuss over color palettes, lawn lengths, or fence heights. Instead, David hints that there is something deeper, even sinister, tied to how the particular Karen wields her HOA status to control and police others. The story's dramatic potential instantly catches one's attention, suggesting that beyond petty rule enforcement, bigotry is a driving force. By referring to an avalanche of dirt, literally and figuratively, David foreshadows the unearthing of secrets or misdeeds that go well beyond a shed's locking mechanism. This mention of dirt suggests the eventual discovery of hidden scandals, intricately linking mundane items, like a gardening shed, to shockingly personal revelations. It also hints at the comedic irony that while the Karen scolds David for insignificant transgressions, she may be hiding far worse issues of her own. It's noteworthy that David maintains a tone of light-hearted confidence. He labels the forthcoming events hilariously karmic, indicating that despite the apparent confrontation, viewers can expect a satisfying turn of events in which wrongdoing is exposed, and justice is served. His breezy, inviting manner puts the audience at ease, even as he warns that the story is going to be good. The phrase underscores that these next moments will be anything but mundane. Lastly, the opening lines succinctly lay out essential elements of the story's conflict. The setting is an ostensibly serene neighborhood, the antagonist is a deeply prejudiced HOA Karen, and David's only crime is exercising basic homeowner rights, locking his own shed. The combination of comedic styling, personal affront, and hints of a much larger scandal ensures that viewers are instantly invested in seeing how matters unfold. This brisk yet revealing introduction masterfully entices the audience to stay tuned, promising that the ensuing drama will highlight both petty and profound themes of intolerance, control, and eventual comeuppance. Moving into Harmony Acres felt like stepping into one of those real estate brochures promising manicured lawns, smiling neighbors, and blissful weekends. David Cornwall, was expecting exactly that: peace, a bit of gardening, maybe an occasional barbecue. What I got instead was the swift realization that this tranquil facade had a watchful guardian, a self-appointed HOA Karen, Patricia Whitfield. The day after I'd locked my crimson storage shed for the first time, I decided to tour the neighborhood on foot. The houses were pristine, driveways immaculate, and gardens curated with borderline obsessive devotion. It looked like a place where people competed over whose hydrangeas bloomed best. In one front yard, I spotted a massive stone statue of an angel, in another, a fountain shaped like a giant teacup. There was individuality, but only within a narrow set of approved aesthetics, a phenomenon I'd soon learn was Patricia's doing. About halfway through my walk, I encountered Mr. Elwood, a kindly retiree who lived a few doors down. He was trimming his rose bushes and paused long enough to greet me. "New face here, aren't you?" he said, leaning on his clippers. I introduced myself, and we made small talk about the local diner and the best grocery store in town. Before I continued, he cast a quick glance up the street, then lowered his voice. "Watch out for Mrs. Whitfield," he warned, a wry smile forming on his lips. "She's a real piece of work when it comes to the HOA. Nothing escapes her notice." I thanked him for the advice, assuming he was referring to some typical busybody who frowned at untrimmed hedges or mismatched curtains. Little did I know, Patricia was no ordinary busybody. She thrived on control, and her brand of neighborly oversight strayed far beyond friendly reminders. That same afternoon, I was tidying up my front lawn when I heard the telltale sound of high heels clicking on pavement. I glanced up to see Patricia herself, approaching with the deliberate steps of someone on a mission. Her pastel blouse and pencil skirt seemed more suited to a corporate boardroom than suburban sidewalks. In one hand, she held a clipboard, in the other, a pen poised as if it might be a scepter. "Good afternoon, Mr. Cornwall," she said with a thin-lipped smile that radiated faux warmth. "Lovely day for yard work, wouldn't you agree?" Her tone sent a signal. She was assessing me. I managed a polite nod, recalling Mr. Elwood's caution. "It is. Just trying to keep things tidy," I replied. She gestured with her pen toward my shed in the backyard. From the street, only the roof was visible, a bright pop of crimson. "I noticed you locked it yesterday," she remarked, as if that single act warranted a full interrogation. "Might I ask why?" Taken aback, I answered simply, "It's where I store my tools, and some are valuable. Locking it gives me peace of mind." Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Here in Harmony Acres," she announced, "we pride ourselves on community trust. Locking a shed suggests anxiety." Her choice of words, and the way her gaze flicked down to her clipboard, implied that my anxiety could become a black mark on some unspoken neighborhood record. I suppressed an urge to point out that many folks lock their garages or tool sheds. Instead, I held her gaze. "I'm sure trust is important, Mrs. Whitfield. But so is safeguarding one's property." She set her jaw, making a note on her clipboard. "Well, I suppose that's your prerogative. I do hope it doesn't set a precedent." Then she pivoted to leave, only to toss a final remark over her shoulder. "Remember, the HOA holds monthly meetings. Attendance is strongly encouraged." With that, she strode off, clipboard tucked under her arm like some sacred text of rules. I watched her go, my annoyance mounting. It wasn't just the questioning that grated on me, it was her tone, an undercurrent of suspicion, as if I'd violated a moral code. And I couldn't ignore the way she'd emphasized my last name, as if I were an outsider who needed monitoring. Over the next few days, the tension simmered. Whenever I returned from errands, I noticed her curtains stirring across the street or her silhouette standing by the window. Once, I caught her strolling on the sidewalk, clearly peering at the lock on my shed from a distance. The whole thing bordered on comedic, except it felt more invasive than funny. Still, I tried to remain optimistic. Perhaps this was a misunderstanding. Maybe Patricia had encountered break-ins in the past and was hypersensitive. Yet the way she held herself, the barely disguised hostility, suggested something else was at play, something deeper than mere neighborhood watchfulness. I carried on with my routine. My newly purchased home had needed a lot of work in the yard, and I took pride in planting a row of sunflowers, cleaning up the lawn edges, and carefully aligning a small bird bath near the porch. But in the back of my mind, a question nagged: why was a locked shed such a trigger for Patricia Whitfield? Little did I suspect that the shed and its lock would be the catalyst for an avalanche of conflict, revealing not only Patricia's meddling but also her ingrained prejudice. And as I was about to learn, she wasn't afraid to wield her HOA powers, or even more unsettling methods, to enforce her misguided sense of harmony. The very next morning brought an unexpected jolt of reality. One that confirmed the uneasy feeling I'd carried since meeting Patricia Whitfield. I was sipping coffee on my porch, admiring the rows of sunflowers I'd planted, when the shrill wail of a siren cut through Harmony Acres. At first, I assumed it was a routine call somewhere else in town. But the flashing lights pulled up right outside my place. Out stepped Officer Rawlings, a young policeman looking both eager and uneasy. His crisp uniform practically swallowed him, and he wore the expression of someone hoping this was all a minor misunderstanding. He approached, checking the address on his notepad. "Are you Mr. Cornwall?" he asked. I set down my mug, feeling a pang of concern. "Yes, that's me. Everything okay?" He cleared his throat. "We received a call about suspicious activity. A neighbor claimed, there's a black homeowner," her words, "locking a shed." She felt threatened. My eyes widened, and the anger in my chest flared. I struggled to maintain composure. "She reported a black homeowner locking a shed as suspicious?" Officer Rawlings nodded apologetically. "Yes, sir. Said it was out of the ordinary." Before I could respond, I noticed Patricia hovering by her picket fence, wearing a self-satisfied smirk that confirmed my suspicion of who'd made the call. Anger warred with incredulity inside me. I'd locked my own property in my own backyard, and that warranted a police report. "Officer," I said, exhaling slowly, "this is my house. That shed is mine. There's nothing suspicious about locking up my belongings." He nodded earnestly. "I understand, Mr. Cornwall. Unfortunately, I'm required to follow up on all calls. May I take a quick look? Just so I can close out the report." Reluctantly, I led him to the backyard. The lock was still in place, the door secure, exactly as it had been the night before. Officer Rawlings jotted something in his pad, glancing around as though verifying I wasn't hiding an armory behind a lawnmower. Meanwhile, Patricia inched closer, maintaining a veneer of false concern. "Officer Rawlings, I'm so relieved you arrived," she cooed, pretending to be alarmed. "You never know what people might be storing. And it's so unusual to lock a shed in this neighborhood." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "Mrs. Whitfield," I replied, forcing a polite tone, "I've done nothing illegal. Unless you count trying to protect my tools as a crime." Her smile tightened, and she gave a delicate shrug. "One can't be too careful. The HOA has standards, after all. And I have a duty to watch for anything amiss." In that moment, I recognized the deeper truth: this wasn't just a petty HOA concern, it was a display of prejudice. She was using my race as a pretext to call the police, all under the guise of neighborhood safety. The realization stung. I'd heard stories of such incidents, but experiencing it firsthand churned my stomach. Officer Rawlings, clearly uncomfortable, cut in. "Everything seems fine here. No sign of wrongdoing. I'll file a report stating it was a false alarm." He glanced back at Patricia with a flicker of disapproval before speaking to me more softly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cornwall. I can't control the calls that come in, but I hope you understand I had to follow procedure." I nodded, appreciating his candor. "You're just doing your job, Officer Rawlings. I get it." After he left, Patricia lingered, arms folded. "Well, now that the matter's resolved, I trust there won't be any more unusual activities." Her condescending tone made my blood boil. Yet, I held my tongue, unwilling to grant her the satisfaction of a heated argument. Instead, I offered a tight-lipped smile. "No unusual activities planned. Though I might lock the shed again if I feel like it." Her eyes flared, but she pivoted and marched off, presumably to pen a new complaint or update her mental tally of infractions. As she retreated, I took a moment to breathe. I could let this moment define me, as the neighbor who scuffled with the HOA over a locked shed, or I could fight back. But how? The conversation with Mr. Elwood surfaced in my mind. He'd implied Patricia had skeletons in her own closet. If she was so keen on sniffing out other people's secrets, maybe it was time to unearth hers. Grabbing my phone, I began to draft a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. Patricia had made a power play, but she'd also tipped her hand. Her prejudice, her willingness to weaponize the HOA, and the 911 line to intimidate me suggested a pattern. If she was indeed hiding something big, I suspected it wouldn't stay buried if I started digging. That evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, I revisited everything I'd learned so far about Harmony Acres. The bylaws, the hush-hush references to unwritten codes, the odd rumor that Patricia had a skeleton in her past. As maddening as her behavior was, it also fueled my curiosity. If she insisted on meddling in my affairs, maybe I'd delve into hers. I didn't want conflict, but I also refused to be cowed by prejudice disguised as neighborhood policing. The thought of investigating Patricia's background felt a bit drastic, yet her brazen call to the cops over nothing was equally extreme. In my mind, a line had been crossed. If confronting a Karen required shining a light on her hypocrisy, so be it. I took a deep breath, gazed at the silent shed in my backyard, and made a silent vow: I won't stand for this. The locked door stood as a reminder that privacy, respect, and fairness were principles worth defending. And if that meant turning the spotlight on Patricia Whitfield, I was more than ready to do so. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the memory of Patricia Whitfield brazenly calling the police just because I, David Cornwall, dared to lock a shed in my own backyard. Every time I saw the lock gleaming under the sun, my frustration resurfaced. But beneath that anger was determination. If Patricia wanted a confrontation, she'd picked the wrong person to antagonize. I decided to revisit the cryptic hint Mr. Elwood had dropped about Patricia. He'd mentioned that she wasn't the paragon of morality she claimed to be, implying her squeaky clean veneer concealed something murky. My plan was simple: if she was delving into my affairs, I would do a little delving of my own. Step 1 was straightforward but surprisingly fruitless: online searches. Patricia didn't have much of a digital footprint. Her name appeared on local HOA rosters, a few charity event listings, and the occasional mention in neighborhood newsletters. Nothing scandalous or even mildly interesting emerged. I found the typical photos of her presiding over HOA potlucks or handing out flyers about lawn regulations. None of it screamed secret scandal. If there was dirt, it wasn't lying around on the first page of a search engine. Discouraged, I decided a more tactile approach might help. I started by talking to neighbors, casually at first, about the history of Harmony Acres. Who built these homes? Were there any interesting stories about property lines or old surveys? I learned that the land had once been farmland, gradually converted into a suburban development. Some folks remembered the original owners, others recalled local gossip about property disputes. But still, no mention of anything that tied back to Patricia. That's when a new angle emerged. A neighbor named Linda, a friendly retiree who loved crocheting on her porch, mentioned that my house and the adjacent lots used to be part of a much bigger tract. You might find all sorts of buried junk if you go digging, she said with a laugh, recalling how the developer rushed to cover old farm debris. Stray tools, rusted metal boxes, people find them occasionally. The phrase, rusted metal boxes, stuck. Something about it echoed Mr. Elwood's comment about secrets. My backyard featured that old crimson storage shed, evidently older than the house itself. Could there be a literal piece of Patricia's past buried near the property? It was far-fetched, yet the notion wouldn't leave me alone. That weekend, armed with a shovel and curiosity, I decided to do some thorough yard work. On the surface, I could pass it off as gardening, just a homeowner beautifying his space. But in truth, I was searching for anything that might hint at a hidden story. I started near the shed, loosening the soil around its base. The deeper I dug, the less I expected to find anything. After a couple of hours, my arms ached and my spirits flagged. But then, I felt the shovel clang against something solid. My heart leaped. Kneeling down, I carefully brushed away dirt, revealing the edge of a small, corroded container. The top was crusted with rust, and part of it had caved in. It looked ancient, like it might disintegrate if I yanked too hard. Adrenaline surged through me as I pried it open, bits of rusty metal flaking off in my hands. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, a few brittle photographs, and what seemed like a stack of old letters. I gingerly lifted them out, my mind racing. Could this be the key to unraveling Patricia's hold over Harmony Acres? The newspaper clippings told a startling story: a decades-old financial scandal in a nearby town involving embezzled funds, questionable real estate deals, and suspicious payoffs. One photograph depicted a younger woman, face partially obscured by the picture's poor quality, but the resemblance to Patricia was uncanny. While her hair was darker and her style more dated, the shape of her jaw and those steely eyes were unmistakable. I skimmed the letters. They mentioned hush money, hidden accounts, and the intense fear of exposure. A few lines referenced forging documents to cover up certain transactions. I didn't see Patricia's name spelled out yet, but the inference was strong enough to make me suspect I'd found something big. If these letters were connected to her, it meant she'd hidden a criminal past behind the banner of the HOA. Clutching the box, I peered around me, half expecting Patricia to pop up behind a bush. The yard was quiet though, with no sign of her prying eyes. I realized I had literal dirt on her, rusty, crumpled proof that she might be a far cry from the moral guardian she claimed to be. I spent the rest of the evening cleaning the documents with care, scanning them into my computer in case the originals deteriorated further. Each snippet added detail to the picture, bank statements, mentions of a shell company, and cryptic references to payouts. The more I saw, the clearer it became that Patricia had once been embroiled in a serious scheme, one that, if exposed, could destroy her image. By the time I finished, my exhaustion had morphed into determination. Patricia had used fear and prejudice to push me around, but she might have reason to fear me now. If the petty complaints to the police were her attempt to keep me in my place, I was about to show her that I wasn't one to back down. She had secrets buried, and I'd unearthed them in my own backyard. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face if she realized how close I was to revealing everything. After the initial shock of discovering that rusted box filled with scandalous documents, I, David Cornwall, felt a surge of conflicting emotions, excitement, disbelief, and a sense of power I hadn't expected to feel in the quiet suburb of Harmony Acres. These weren't random scraps, they depicted financial misdeeds, embezzlement, fraudulent transactions, suspicious bribes, and the faint outline of a major cover-up. If I was reading them correctly, Patricia Whitfield was deeply involved. I spent hours scrutinizing every page, carefully transcribing notes on my laptop. Some of the references were vague, involving coded references to real estate deals and sums of money. But the evidence was strong enough to imply that Patricia had once orchestrated or at least abetted a large-scale fraud. The letters even hinted that she'd changed her last name at some point to escape the associated disgrace. My immediate problem was verifying authenticity. It was possible the box belonged to someone else, and Patricia's uncanny resemblance in an old photo was just coincidence. But the more I studied that face, the more certain I became. The newspaper clippings described a woman with the same confident smile and even the same distinctive tilt of the head. Adding to that, the dates aligned with a period in her life she rarely, if ever, mentioned. I faced another question: how could I leverage this information responsibly? Blackmail was never my intention, I wasn't looking to stoop to her level. Still, she'd used unscrupulous methods to intimidate me. Perhaps shining a light on her hypocrisy could free me from her harassment. But I didn't want to transform Harmony Acres into a public battleground without a plan. I needed help, legal help, ideally. That's when I remembered a conversation with Mr. Elwood about a local lawyer, Miss Selina Ford. She was known for her tenacity, especially when challenging corrupt individuals. If anyone could decipher these documents and advise me, it would be her. The next morning, I paid a visit to her modest law office, a brick building situated between a bakery and a flower shop on Main Street. Miss Ford greeted me with a warm handshake and a quizzical smile. "Mr. Cornwall," she said, eyeing the battered box I carried. "This is unusual. Have a seat and tell me everything." I spent the next hour recounting the saga of Patricia's harassment, my rummaging in the backyard, and the discovery of these explosive files. Miss Ford listened intently, taking brisk notes. Periodically, she'd exhale sharply or let a slow whistle escape when I described the more incriminating details. When I finished, she leaned back, tapping a pen against her notepad. You weren't kidding about a doozy, she said, half smiling. These kinds of documents can be gold, or worthless if they're forgeries. But if they're real, Patricia could be in serious legal jeopardy. Embezzlement, fraud, bribery. That's more than enough to ruin someone's reputation and land them in court. I nodded. I'm no fan of airing dirty laundry, but she's used her position as an HOA Karen to terrorize me and, presumably, others. She even weaponized the police against me. I need to defend myself, but I'm not sure how to do it properly. Miss Ford tapped a manila folder with an encouraging grin. Here's the plan. I'll examine these documents for authenticity. If they hold up, we can present them strategically, through the HOA if necessary, or even the media, but in a legal manner that protects you. The key is ensuring everything remains factual. If Patricia tries to deny or spin the story, we'll be ready. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, grateful to have a professional on my side. So, you believe we can challenge her? Absolutely, Miss Ford said. But I suggest we do it at the next HOA meeting. That's her stage, her comfort zone. If we expose her there, she can't claim we blindsided her. It sounded bold, confronting Patricia in front of her peers. Yet, given the depth of her manipulations, it felt right. This wasn't just about me, it was about revealing how a conniving individual had lorded her so-called moral authority over innocent neighbors for who knows how long. Leaving Miss Ford's office, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. My phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Elwood, any updates on the saga? I typed back a cryptic note, found something big. Meeting soon. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji, likely curious to witness the fallout. That evening, as I stepped into my backyard, I gazed at the shed that had triggered this entire chain of events. A swirl of gratitude flickered within me. If not for Patricia's over-the-top reaction, I might never have discovered her hidden past. The concept of poetic justice made me smile. The lock that so offended her was the very thing that led me to find her skeletons in the ground. Still, caution lingered in my mind. Patricia was bold, and a cornered foe might lash out. I resolved to keep a watchful eye on my property in the coming days, double-checking the shed's padlock and occasionally scanning for suspicious activity. My neighbors were none the wiser about the evidence tucked away in my desk drawer, but that would soon change, assuming everything went according to Miss Ford's plan. I couldn't help picturing Patricia's expression when we laid out her misdeeds for the entire HOA. No polite small talk, no subtle intimidation, just cold, hard facts. In a neighborhood where she tirelessly policed others, she was about to face the harshest scrutiny of all. The thought left me with an odd sense of satisfaction. For once, the Karen in the pastel blouse wouldn't have the final say. The days leading up to the next HOA gathering felt like a countdown to a reckoning. Miss Selina Ford, true to her word, plunged into verifying the documents I'd discovered in my backyard. Her updates arrived via polite but urgent texts, cross-checked the bank statements, definitely not doctored, or found matching references to a decades-old real estate dispute. Each message confirmed that Patricia Whitfield's secrets were genuine and far darker than mere gossip. Meanwhile, Harmony Acres bustled on as if nothing unusual was brewing. Kids rode bikes, retired couples pruned their gardens, and the occasional neighbor engaged me in small talk about the weather. But beneath the surface, I sensed a shift. Word travels fast in suburban enclaves, and the rumor mill had begun churning about Patricia's issues with me. Whether it was disapproval over a locked shed or speculation about her curious interest in my activities, people seemed more guarded around me, as if suspecting I harbored a bombshell. They weren't entirely wrong. Patricia, for her part, seemed determined to pretend all was normal. I often saw her strolling the neighborhood, politely greeting others but shooting me icy glares whenever we crossed paths. One afternoon, I overheard her telling a neighbor in hushed tones that she had taken the necessary steps to ensure harmony, presumably referencing her call to the police. My blood boiled at the recollection. She wanted to spin this saga into an act of neighborly vigilance rather than blatant harassment. Mr. Elwood dropped by one evening, curiosity radiating from him. "David," he said in a conspiratorial whisper, "I'm hearing talk that you're planning something big at the HOA meeting. Should I bring popcorn?" I grinned despite myself, acknowledging I couldn't say too much. "Let's just say it's going to be interesting. You might want a front row seat." He left chuckling, as if anticipating the show of a lifetime. Finally, the meeting day arrived. Miss Ford and I had agreed that direct confrontation was our best move. We'd show up with a binder of neatly organized evidence, copies of the letters, newspaper clippings, and those incriminating photos. If Patricia insisted on continuing her campaign against me, we'd counter with the truth about her. The plan was bold, perhaps even risky, but letting her perpetuate her bigotry unchallenged felt wrong. That evening, I strolled into the community hall, heart pounding with a strange mix of nerves and excitement. Rows of foldable chairs faced a dais where the HOA board typically sat. I spotted Patricia near the front, dressed in her usual pastel outfit, conferring with two of her staunch supporters. As soon as I entered, her eyes darted my way, then flicked back in a moment of feigned indifference. She clearly wanted to maintain her image of calm authority. The meeting began in typical HOA fashion. A discussion about trash schedules, the new rule limiting the number of flower pots allowed on front porches, and a reminder about the upcoming neighborhood barbecue. The banality dragged on, fueling my impatience. Eventually, the board member leading the session said, "Does anyone have new business to address?" Seizing the moment, I stood and cleared my throat. "I have something I'd like to share," I declared, glancing at Miss Ford, who nodded. The room quieted, a few people shifting in their seats with curiosity. Patricia stiffened noticeably. "Thank you for the floor," I began. "Recently, there was an incident involving a locked shed, which I'm sure some of you have heard about." A murmur swept through the audience, many exchanging knowing looks. In response, certain allegations were leveled against me, unfounded allegations, I might add. But this isn't about me. It's about what I uncovered while trying to defend myself. Miss Ford clicked on a small projector we'd set up, the beam illuminating a portable screen. "I discovered a cache of documents buried on my property," I continued, "and they point to a series of financial crimes and a cover-up tied to someone in this very community." A collective gasp. Patricia rose halfway out of her seat, color draining from her face. Before she could cut me off, I flipped to the first slide, a grainy newspaper clipping from years ago detailing embezzlement at a local bank. The black and white photograph showed a woman bearing an undeniable resemblance to Patricia, though younger and with a different hair color. Soft whispers rippled through the hall. Patricia's knuckles turned white as she gripped the back of her chair. "This is preposterous," she hissed, voice too low for most to hear. But Miss Ford advanced the slides, revealing bank statements linking the suspect's alias to offshore accounts, hush money paid out, and short notes referencing bribed officials. "Her real name," I said calmly, "appears to have been Victoria Whitewood during the scandal. She changed it to Patricia Whitfield sometime after these incidents to distance herself from the charges." People gawked, eyes flickering between me and Patricia. The hush was electric, as if everyone realized this was more than petty conflict. Patricia finally found her voice. "This is slander," she cried, turning to the HOA board. "He's fabricating lies to smear me. You must put a stop to this." But the evidence scrolled on. Copies of old letters, a ledger with detailed payouts, and a photograph showing a younger Patricia making large withdrawals at a bank overshadowed by accusations of fraud. The tension in the room mounted. Some people openly expressed shock, while a few of Patricia's close allies stared at her in bewilderment. Miss Ford stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Selina Ford, counsel for Mr. Cornwall. These documents have been authenticated by a third-party archivist. If Mrs. Whitfield insists they're false, we welcome an expert review." Patricia stammered, lacking a coherent rebuttal. It was clear she hadn't prepared to face her own past under such glaring light. The silence grew thick as the final slide displayed a summary linking her name changes to a timeline of suspicious activities. Patricia trembled, tears threatening to spill. You can't do this," she whispered, but the entire gathering saw the raw panic in her eyes. I took a breath, my voice steady. "All I ever did was lock my shed, and you called the police on me. If that's how you treat innocent neighbors, perhaps you should answer for the skeletons in your own closet before you point fingers at others." A stunned hush enveloped the hall. Patricia remained standing, mouth working soundlessly as though words had abandoned her. She was no longer the commanding Karen, but a figure caught in the headlights of truth. And I, once her target, now stood at the center, shining a spotlight on her hidden misdeeds for the entire HOA to witness. A pin-drop hush followed the last projector slide. Patricia Whitfield, once the imperious Karen of Harmony Acres, now stood in stunned silence. The incriminating evidence, bank statements, photos, and letters, had peeled away her mask of unassailable virtue. The crowd assembled for the HOA meeting looked on with wide-eyed disbelief. Her first reaction was predictable, denial. "That's not me," she croaked, shaking her head in dismay. "It can't be. These images are doctored. He's forging documents to humiliate me." But the evidence was too thorough, and as Miss Selina Ford calmly reiterated the authenticity checks, Patricia's righteous facade cracked further. People in the room began whispering among themselves, an undercurrent of shock punctuated by audible gasps. I, David Cornwall, surveyed the scene with a strange mixture of triumph and pity. Once, Patricia had been the self-appointed leader, always dictating how neighbors should act, always threatening to invoke the HOA when someone dared defy her unwritten rules. Now, she was scrambling for any defense, stammering out protests no one believed. An older woman from the audience, who'd previously nodded along to Patricia's every decree, rose to her feet. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said in a tremulous voice, "I've known you for years, but I can't ignore what I'm seeing. Is any of this true?" Her tone wavered, reflecting both betrayal and confusion. Patricia let out a shaky laugh, a brittle attempt at regaining control. "Of course not, Dorothy," she insisted. "You know me better than to believe I'd be involved in embezzlement or hush money." But the words fell flat amid the damning visuals on the projector screen. One of Patricia's previously staunch allies, a man in a crisp polo shirt named Clark, spoke up. The documents mentioned bribes to officials, repeated name changes, and large sums of money leaving local banks. "This is too specific to be a coincidence, Patricia. Or should I say Victoria?" That final jab cut deeper than any other. The earlier documents revealed that Victoria Whitewood was likely an alias Patricia once held, a name linked to the banking scandal. She spun around, pointing an accusing finger at me. "This is all your fault," she hissed. "You and your locked shed. You've had it out for me from the start." From the corner of my eye, I noticed Mr. Elwood standing near the exit, arms crossed. He looked unimpressed by her performance. "It seems like your own past is what started this," he remarked quietly, his voice carrying a weight of long-held suspicions. "David just stumbled on what you tried to bury." The murmuring in the hall grew louder, a chorus of questions piling onto Patricia. "When did this happen? Were the charges dropped, or did you evade them? Did you pay people off?" Her attempts to respond disintegrated into frantic half-denials, each one more unconvincing than the last. Sensing the conversation spinning out of control, Miss Ford stepped forward. "Perhaps we should maintain order," she announced. "We're not here to hold a trial, but to present findings that are relevant to the HOA. Mrs. Whitfield has been using her position to police this community unfairly. Now that we know her history, we should discuss how to proceed." A hush fell again as the HOA board members, seated at the dais, exchanged uneasy glances. The board president, Mrs. Copley, cleared her throat. "Thank you, Ms. Ford. This is certainly unexpected. Before we move forward, do you have anything else to share, Mrs. Whitfield? She locked eyes with Patricia, offering a final chance for some sort of explanation or contrition. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it, clearly grasping at straws. Her eyes flicked around, searching for a friendly face in the crowd. I only wanted to uphold the HOA standards, she stammered, to keep this place safe and respectable. By calling the police on me for locking my own shed? I said, carefully controlling my tone. By targeting neighbors who don't fit your vision of respectable? The rhetorical question hung in the air. Patricia refused to answer, her silence more damning than any confession. After what felt like an eternity, the board president spoke again, quietly. We'll need an emergency session to address these revelations. Mrs. Whitfield, until this matter is resolved, I suggest you step down from any HOA leadership responsibilities. Patricia's face blanched, as though she'd physically reeled from the blow. The dreaded possibility that her reign as the community's moral overseer might come to an end loomed large. You can't do that, she muttered weakly, but no one rushed to her defense. One by one, her circle of cronies withdrew, edging away from her row of chairs. The unstoppable Karen had become the object of scandal, and nobody wanted to be associated with her downfall. Even those who had aligned with her strict rules were now re-evaluating their stance in the face of potential criminal undertones. Quietly, Miss Ford shut down the projector, concluding our presentation. I caught her eye and nodded in thanks. She'd done her part brilliantly. The room felt charged with tension, but also a strange sense of relief. The unspoken worry that Patricia wielded too much power had lingered for years, and now that worry was being stripped of its illusion. Patricia sank into her seat, face ashen, while the rest of us filed out. Whispers buzzed around me as neighbors tried to process the bombshell revelations. Some glanced at me with something akin to admiration, others with cautious curiosity. I wasn't exactly proud of exposing her so publicly, but I couldn't ignore the satisfaction of seeing justice served. At last, the tyrannical reign of the HOA Karen teetered on the brink. Whatever punishments she faced, legal or social, would be of her own making. And as I slipped out of the meeting hall, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The truth had broken free, and no locked shed or phony rules would keep it contained again. The fall of Patricia Whitfield was swift, almost dizzying to watch. Within days of the HOA meeting, whispers turned into a full-blown neighborhood uproar. The board convened an emergency session, stripped her of her authority, and announced a thorough investigation. Word spread that criminal charges could surface if her past deeds proved as serious as the documents suggested. Harmony Acres, once a stage for Patricia's posturing, became a place of hushed gossip and pointed looks whenever she ventured outdoors. The former Karen-in-chief now slunk around with dark glasses and a stiff posture, more like someone hiding from paparazzi than presiding over local law and ordinances. Meanwhile, Miss Selina Ford busied herself confirming that law enforcement was, indeed, interested in re-evaluating a certain decades-old bank scandal. In a surprising turn, some of Patricia's staunch supporters attempted damage control. They argued that maybe the documents were misunderstood or taken out of context. But a few more curious neighbors dug up archived newspapers, finding that the alleged scandal had, in fact, been front-page news once upon a time. While the article never mentioned Patricia's current name, the timeline and photos left little doubt. I, David Cornwall, was caught between relief and a faint sense of discomfort. On one hand, I felt vindicated. The woman who had weaponized her prejudice against me for merely locking my shed was finally facing accountability. On the other, this wasn't how I'd envisioned living in a peaceful suburb. Publicly exposing someone's shadowy past wasn't exactly a hallmark of good neighborly relations, but I reminded myself that justice sometimes demands big revelations. Patricia herself tried to salvage her position by penning a letter to the HOA, insisting she was a victim of malicious propaganda. She claimed I had orchestrated a vendetta to undermine the community. The letter landed like a damp firework. Few sympathized, particularly after reading the archived news that contradicted her pleas. During one poignant moment, I crossed paths with her at the local grocery store. She said nothing, only giving me a wounded glare before turning away. Gone was her condescending smirk, replaced by a haunted look that suggested she realized the jig was up. For a fleeting instant, I felt a twinge of pity. Then I remembered the day she'd called the police simply because I dared lock my own property, citing my presence as suspicious. The pity faded. Meanwhile, the HOA board appointed a temporary head, a level-headed neighbor named Alicia Parsons, who seemed genuinely interested in restoring trust. Alicia even apologized to me personally for the earlier drama. I thanked her and expressed hope that Harmony Acres could return to its intended sense of community. In the distance, the once meticulous lawn at Patricia's house began to show signs of neglect, untrimmed hedges, a slight yellowing on the edges of her beloved flower beds. It was a subtle but telling signal. As for me, I took pleasure in a newfound calm. My crimson storage shed remained firmly locked, unremarkable at last. No more suspicious calls, no more overshadowing presence from across the street. And so, while it wasn't exactly the quiet life I'd planned, Harmony had returned to Harmony Acres, albeit through the downfall of its most vocal guardian. A few weeks later, the aftermath of Patricia Whitfield's downfall settled into a curious normalcy. Neighbors resumed their daily routines, walking dogs, chatting over fences, and attending modest HOA gatherings that bore little resemblance to the tense drama of before. The atmosphere in Harmony Acres felt lighter, as if the dense cloud of scrutiny Patricia once cast had finally lifted. Rumors swirled that Patricia had been summoned to meetings with law enforcement regarding the old embezzlement scandal. Some said she'd been seen entering the local courthouse with a lawyer by her side. Miss Selina Ford, for her part, confirmed that a formal inquiry was in progress but couldn't share details. The hush around the investigation only heightened the sense that Patricia's problems were far from over. During this lull, I, David Cornwall, found myself adjusting to a new role, that of the unintentional local hero who'd stood up to a Karen. People I barely knew waved hello and gave me encouraging nods, as if to say, "Good job standing your ground." It was nice, though occasionally awkward. I hadn't sought admiration, merely the right to lock my own shed in peace. One Saturday morning, I decided to give the backyard a thorough cleanup, clearing out old leaves and sprucing up the flower beds near my crimson storage shed. It felt almost surreal to recall how a simple padlock on that shed had touched off an avalanche of confrontation. Now, the shed was just a shed. No more police visits, no more prying eyes from across the street. Meanwhile, Patricia's once pristine property continued its slow decline. Her extravagant garden gnome display vanished, as though she no longer had the spirit to maintain the illusions of suburban perfection. The front curtains remained drawn most days, and rumors suggested she was finalizing plans to move out of Harmony Acres. If that was true, I suspected no one would try to dissuade her. On occasion, I caught glimpses of her from my window, pale and somber, a far cry from the pastel-bloused figure who once brandished HOA regulations like a sword. Sometimes, I thought about approaching her, perhaps to offer a word of closure. But our last interaction had soured any possibility of civil conversation. Whenever she spotted me, she retreated. In the end, I decided that some endings don't require parting words. Our conflict had escalated beyond neighborly tiffs, revealing an undercurrent of prejudice and a deep reservoir of secrets. Any sense of regret I might have felt was tempered by the knowledge that justice demanded transparency. Patricia had created her own undoing, and I had simply refused to be her scapegoat. As time passed, my life settled into a pleasant rhythm. On sunny afternoons, I'd host small barbecues, inviting the kinder neighbors I'd grown to know, including Mr. Elwood and the newly appointed HOA head, Alicia Parsons. Talk occasionally circled back to the fiasco that once overshadowed Harmony Acres, but each retelling felt more distant, like recalling a half-forgotten storm. Eventually, the story of the HOA Karen and the locked shed receded into local lore, an anecdote told to new arrivals as a cautionary tale. "Don't cross David Cornwall," people joked, "unless you want secrets unearthed." I'd laugh politely, knowing the real moral was simpler: never underestimate the power of truth, and never let prejudice go unchallenged. And that, as they say, was that. The once feared Queen of Harmony Acres had fallen, and a measure of genuine harmony returned in her wake. My shed remained locked, of course, but now it carried a different symbolism: proof that standing one's ground, with integrity, can topple even the most imposing adversary.